I've decided to keep a journal.
Hey everybody, welcome to Podcasty For Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Paul Schrader, where we watch every film written and or directed by American filmmaker Paul Schrader and explore how they speak to their moment. And this one, show's hosted by two guys. I'm one of the guys. My name is Jake Serwin.
I'm one of the guys. My name is Ian Ryan. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing perfectly fine. Thank you so much. Last time we're going to hear the Schrader theme for a little bit.
It's true.
Until whichever of the scripts he gets to
the nuttiest
first.
Professor. Yep.
Yep. The basics of philosophy? The
Yes.
basis of philosophy. Which one is it?
I think it's Basics, if I'm not mistaken.
Or whatever the sexy Wall Street movie he's got cooking up. I'm excited. But anyway, yeah, I'm doing fine. You are, something interesting about you today
Is my
that you're in the other room.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ian's visiting me here in, what do we call it? The Kendall Carter Memorial Studios.
Yesterday, we decided to call it the Kendall Carter Memorial Studios.
I think that's a
After
joke
our
I'm ripping
fallen-
off from our guest today. I think I took that from the Gore Lieberman Studios, where our esteemed guest recorded his show. But we'll introduce him in just 2 seconds. Real quick, if you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe to our Patreon. $5 a month, get a bonus episode every other week. We cover Clint Eastwood stuff. We cover Paul Schrader stuff. Just the other day, we did... what did we do? We did the Sweet Hereafter. That's related to this.
We sure did. A little Russell Banks action.
Yeah, we've done... coming up, we've got a episode where I just make Ian open his Christmas gifts on microphone. So
That's right.
if you like stuff like that...
And then we also did The Beguiled, if you want actual
The Beguiled.
Clint
There you
Eastwood
go.
content. Yep.
So patreon.com/podcasty for me. Let's bring our guest in. Our guest today, so excited to have him. He's a writer, co-host of the podcast Michael and Us and the Important Cinema Club, as well as a real live Canadian person. Welcome back to the show, Will Sloan. How you doing, Will?
Hey, Will.
Very happy to be back, and because it's 9 p.m. in my time zone, and in honor of Paul Schrader, who I think has indulged in this himself, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, which I will be having during the recording. So things could get a little dangerous. I don't know.
All right.
that's-
Well,
yeah,
keep the Pepto
that's-
handy. Well, that's the next stage.
Exactly. Do you have your loaded gun as well? Is that under the pillow?
Yeah.
Save
Yeah, I'm just going to see pornography all day, every day, day and night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His specific phrase that's really stuck with me is, I was going to pornography a lot.
Mhm.
Yep.
Which, like, does he mean like, sort of turning to it, like, metaphysically, or does he mean, because you used to have to travel?
I was facing towards pornography.
Yeah. What a guy. Today we're talking about Oh Canada, but first we have our signature segment, the 2 questions. Let's jump right in here. This is, of course, the segment where we ask each other 2 questions to get to know one another and start off the show. Will, do you have a question for us this evening?
Yeah, sorry, do I ask 2 or do I ask 1?
You ask 1 unless you have 2 really good ones.
That's
but you
usually
don't
the
have to
secret
do-
third question before the 2 questions. How many questions do I ask?
Okay, who is your favorite Beatle and why? A classic question.
Oh, okay. Ian, do you want to go first? Should I go first?
Oh, sure. I have a boring answer. Old Georg, George Harrison, because when I was 14 or whatever, I thought I basically discovered him. I thought I had found out that, everybody else knew about
liked this one.
Yeah.
Except me. I'm the first one, yeah.
And then I just kept liking him. And then, whatever, the Scorsese doc came out when we were in college, and it was, he continued to be interesting. And I mean, the few songs, the thing is, he was in classic artist fashion. It served him that he just did a couple like all-timers, and then otherwise sort of sitting back in he didn't have time to do what do you think would have been George Harrison's Thomas the Tank Engine?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Oh, I think it was like Time Bandits or whatever, or Water. Is that the name of that movie? He had Apple Films, right? Wasn't he?
It was
Yeah.
handmade films.
Handmade
Wow,
films. Excuse
really
me.
good.
Yes.
And
And
if you watch Life of Brian, there's a scene where he's an extra. Keep it, a shiny silver dollar for either of you if you can spot George Harrison among the guys with fake beards in the background.
bearded guys.
The fake Jesus is
When I'm putting on Life of Brian, first thing I do is look for blackface John Cleese as one of the 3 wise men.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Check that box.
You can't do
Just
that
an
today.
incredible
They'll cancel
image.
you. Am I right, guys?
Yeah, they'll exactly. They'll let you go on TV to say this about that. Yeah. What I think was that your question last time, Will? I think you asked us our favorite Python.
That's interesting.
That might be right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think maybe.
Interesting.
Okay, good. Well,
I've gone through. You've got a theme.
Yeah.
I think I've gone through most of the Beatles because, like, you know, as a angry young man, you like John, probably. And then you want to be cool, so you like George.
Yeah.
And then at some point there's kind of I feel like the low culture is actually high culture.
Is the Paul
sort of
time.
Galaxy brain thing comes in. I didn't really have a Paul period because I think I just find him I appreciate him, but I find him a little not corny, but like embarrassing.
Well, I had to tell you, Jake, you're having a bit of a Paul period right now. It's
a huge point you've made. But as a drummer and medium to large nose haver myself, I think Ringo I always return to, and I think also of the kind of the aw shucks, thanks for letting me come along too, guys. Attitude that Ringo brings, I think, really appeals to me. So, peace and love, peace and love.
That's why I'm tempted to say Ringo as well, because I think it's a difficult question, actually, because, for the sort of consensus greatest band of all time, all of them have all of them are kind of embarrassing to answer with.
That's right.
Despite the fact that they're all legends and that we all love them, that's why I think this is still an interesting question. Because if you say Ringo, they'll think you're like 500 Days of Summer, Manic Pixie, the Contrarian.
Yes.
But I would say like Ringo just as a guy is the one I like the most.
He's great as a guy, but I think also as a drummer, he just has an undeniable feel, and I think I really appreciate the restraint. Like, it's so easy to play too much on the drums, but it's actually pretty hard to play as little as Ringo did. Although I would suspect that most of my favorite Ringo drumming songs were probably Paul, and I just don't know that.
So the case for Paul, I think, and, I don't think he has the best solo career out of the four, but I think he has the second best solo career. But
interesting.
Although he's neck and neck with George in that regard, they have about as many good solo albums,
which is
one.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, it's like Paul has like 5 songs, maybe that make him maybe the highest ranking person on earth. And I genuinely don't. I think there is maybe nobody else, with the possible exception of Bob Dylan, who, if one were to just meet him on the street, you'd be more overwhelmed with emotion about. So that has to count for something. And also, and I would also say that in terms of the like good guy question, I'm sure he has his problems, but for a guy who's that famous, he seems to be about as good as you possibly can be. He seems affable considering.
Yeah. He does seem like a pretty normal guy.
Yeah, I couldn't help but be won over. I had some friends in Mexico who they recently went to see him. He did like 2 different concerts within a pretty short period, and they were so excited to see this guy, and they were like asking me to translate some of his solo work that they didn't really understand what it was talking about, and it sort of felt like, well, if you guys are getting so much out of this, like I shouldn't be trying to like big time Paul's stuff just because it's not maybe my most favorite of the Beatles, but obviously there's, like you're saying, Will, there's still so much going on that it's,
but
what are you going to...
Speaking of Mexican live music performances, this reminds me, when I visited Ian in Oaxaca, Ian lives within earshot of the Guelaguetza Auditorium in Oaxaca, this big open air auditorium. And while we were there, there was it was a reunion show, I think, for the Mexican rock band Caifanes, which they were very big in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And they ended their reunion show. They closed the set with Imagine, with someone else's song. Fairly, mediocre rendition of it as well. So there's something to be said, I think, for the sheer penetration of the John Lennon thing.
That's true.
But also he beat up his wife and stuff. It seemed kind of
So with the beating
Leonard
up
Fife
the wife
quality.
situation, I obviously do not approve of that. I think that's bad. But what I would also say is that gets brought up so much, and to judge somebody by the worst thing they've ever done, I don't necessarily think is fair.
To be a
someone
little
should make a movie
cynical, to judge a 70s rock artist by having committed some domestic violence, it's sort of like a, let he who has not sinned situation.
Right.
Because I'd like you to find the male white artist who didn't commit some type of what would now be considered a crime.
Yep. And you can't even, I was going to say maybe someone who was deeply limited physically.
Sure.
And then I remembered Harry Knowles. So that's out of
Well, Harry Knowles, I mean,
contention.
you really have to separate the artist from the art because the prose, I mean, what John Lennon did with Cold Turkey, Harry Knowles did with his Blade 2 review.
Yeah. Or, of course, Harry Knowles' review of Ants, where he said it was the best work Woody Allen had done since Annie Hall.
Wow.
So speaking of that, I don't want to get too far into a Harry Knowles digression, but
I shouldn't have brought up Woody.
But please look up Harry Knowles' review of Hollywood Ending, because he saw it after having an operation where he had an exposed nerve. And so the review is him talking, look this up right now. It's him talking about how he was in physical agony for the whole time, but he was also laughing so hard because he loves Woody so much. And so inside he was ping-ponging between the worst physical pain he's ever felt.
Yeah.
And just, it's our bud Woody. And I think this belongs in the film criticism Mount Rushmore.
It opens with pain, excruciating pain. Now, I'm surprised because I know have Harry Knowles to have, some health problems.
Yes.
And so you mentioned that he had an operation. I was assuming it was something to do with that. This is he lost a crown and he had a molar with an exposed nerve, which that's still very painful. I'm just surprised to hear that
it's an unrelated affliction.
Thing that could happen to affliction.
Yeah, I was thinking that tooth stuff.
All right. Thank you very much for the question, Will. I've got one for the two of you. Now, if a mysterious benefactor, this is sort of an imaginative question. A mysterious benefactor offers you $1 million to make a documentary on the subject of your choice, but you have to name the subject in the next 2 minutes. What are you picking? You can't think about it too much.
Gosh, for so many years, my answer would have been Bruce Lee, who is the famous Bruce Lee imitator, but they literally just made a documentary about him.
Right.
So
Enter the Clone. That itch scratched, huh?
Enter the Clones of Bruce. So, you know what? I'm going to keep that as my answer though, because that was a kind of a survey of the whole Bruceploitation genre. Okay. So I think I'm still going to answer just Bruce Lee, what Scorsese did for George Harrison. I want to see someone do for Bruce Lee. Yeah.
Right. Living in the material world. Something
that's
like that.
Right.
Terrible. Really bad.
Yeah.
I wish I could. I want to step into traffic about that.
You should have said that to Paul Schrader when you interviewed him. I think he would have got a kick out of that.
I made some other stupid joke to him. Oh, it was about, I think I mentioned something about a Phil Collins farewell tour. I don't know what happened, man. I was out of my mind.
You did say that, yeah. I think you talked about him having his first farewell tour. I think
Phil Collins, he called it his first final farewell tour. And I think my joke was about Schrader saying that he had made his last film 5 times.
Yeah. Yeah, this was his first post-mortem film, I believe he said.
Yes, yeah, he chuckled. Okay.
All right, I'm going to go with, there is a regenerative agriculture Japanese guy named Fukuoka, who I think is very interesting for 2 reasons. One, just because...
Is this the guy with the dense food forest thing?
Yeah. He was an early food forest. So he advocated for real stuff. And he's also often quite annoying in his writing, which I think makes for an interesting, I guess I'm imagining an R. Crumb style person who did something significant and worth consideration, but also is just difficult to be around or to sort of alienated most of the people who came in contact with him. So I would like to find out about how those 2 things came together.
That sounds terrific. I, of course, had the good fortune to think of the question myself and think of an answer for a long time.
Sure did, yeah.
I would like to make a documentary about Los Angeles street food vendors who are an indelible part of what makes the city so great and are also constantly harassed and punished by the city and the police. And I think this needs more attention on it. I would love to put cameras in the faces of people like city council member Hugo Soto Martinez, who's the child of street vendors and now just like votes to give the cops more lasers or whatever.
Yeah.
So
I'm imagining this doc opening, people coming out of a concert, and there they are, the
bacon
Sonora
wrapped
dog.
hot dogs.
Yeah.
The chili with the fruit and the mango. And I mean, it wouldn't be that hard to do some of this research, obviously, to just go around and like eat stuff off a street cart. So look out for street vendor coming to Chicken Soup for the Soul Plus. All right, that's enough of that. Let's get into the movie. Let's talk about Oh Canada. Oh, but first, Will, I got to ask you, what is your history with Paul Schrader? Where are you on Schrader? Do you have favorites? Do you have undersung films you go to bat for?
Oh, well, obviously, I'm a big fan of Paul Schrader. I came to Paul Schrader, I think, the same way that most people come to Paul Schrader, through Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, The Last Temptation of Christ. Through, I think there are certain filmmakers, when you're a teenager and you're kind of getting into movies, there are certain filmmakers who you come into through Scorsese or as like an appendage to Scorsese.
Yep.
Abel Ferreira is like that for me as well,
Sure.
even though they're not really connected, except that Bad Lieutenant feels like,
right.
Like the highway detour off of
You got a
Streets.
cartel in there.
Yeah,
exactly. And I kind of, for many years kept up with Paul Schrader, kind of on the fumes of Scorsese, I think. Like I saw The Walker, for example, when it was new, I saw Autofocus when it was fairly recent. I saw Hardcore and American Gigolo and Blue Collar when I was, in undergrad, watching movies like that. And then there was that period in the 2000s where I sort of, he was lodged in my brain at some point as like somebody to keep up on. So like I was going to see Dog Eat Dog and The Canyons, and though that period, it was a little weird. And then obviously First Reformed came out, and I remember I got a ticket to see First Reformed at the Toronto Film Festival, and my good friend laughed at me when I said I'd got a ticket because Dog Eat Dog was the year before.
Fool.
And he was like, "Why would you see that? He's done." Famous last words, and just being like obviously blown away by First Reformed and this run of movies since. And I feel like this run of movies since has felt like the most uncompromised he's ever been. Before First Reformed, I think I probably would have said great screenwriter, some good movies, but like at best, a problematic career. Like obviously Mishima's great, Blue Collar's great, but there were so many kind of like dodgy ones. And it's funny, I think, how the recent run of movies has clicked a lot of his career into focus, and something like The Canyons, which has things in it that are interesting. It makes that period of movies seem like, him finding his way to First Reformed, and it makes it makes that wilderness period more interesting.
I remember when First Reformed was getting raves and had the A24 marketing behind it. I remember hearing, I think, Nick Pinkerton on the Film Comment podcast talking about feeling sort of angry, like when a band you like gets really popular, and he was saying, I was there through Adam Resurrected. I was hanging on.
Yeah.
And now all these Johnny come latelys, but I think certainly, like watching the Schrader, the phoenix that's risen from the ashes, part of his career, you do kind of think of the rest of it as a series of fits and starts, and then he finally like turns the engine over and he makes First Reformed.
And you're asking me if there are any that I would like go to bat for. I mean, you know, in the last 10 years, I've definitely become more interested in Schrader than ever. And I love autofocus. That's one of my favorites. And I think something that movie captures is just the way that that character is able to compartmentalize, the way that he sees like
it's spooky.
no contradiction between the two lives that he has. I think he gets at something there that's very real and that is under articulated in art.
I think so. I think you're right. Like the dividing there's like the Schraderian protagonist who like is what's the guy from Crime and Punishment? Raskolnikov? Is that his name?
Yeah.
There's the Schraderian, the Travis Bickles, the journaling guy, the guy who has an overarching philosophy. And then there's like the other half of his career. He makes movies about people with like absolutely no interiority, like people with no even interest in wondering why they're thinking things. And I think Autofocus is maybe the most successful and fascinating of those films. In
part because it's a guy who is documenting like every single part of his life and still not reflecting on it. Has this abyss that makes it somehow possible to do both those things. Yeah, it's great.
It's wonderful. I might rewatch Autofocus. Not something I thought I would be saying, but
I also think Autofocus is just like such a watchable movie. You know, Greg Kinnear and Willem Dafoe are a great duo. You know, you like them.
Right, and it's got that kind of proto Mad Men sort of slick, cocktail in hand kind of fun to it before it all goes dark in an Arizona motel pool. Speaking of dark, Will, have you seen Dark, the recut of Dying of the Light?
Well, this is embarrassing because I actually haven't, and I've had it like on my laptop for years, it seems. I have seen Dying of the Light, though. I saw it when it was new, and that felt like the real lowest ebb. You know, I saw it.
See, that's the power.
Yeah.
But that's the power of Dark. I got to tell you, Will, I'm going to go to bat right now. And first of all, I hate to quote people's reviews at them, but I did like your O'Cannon review. And I'm going to quote a non-spoilery part before we get to the movie where you say, Schrader still undefeated, except for all those times he was defeated.
Right.
To me, the Dying of the Light / Dark is the ultimate. Was he defeated? I think no, because he takes this thing that seems like such a just like piece of shit. You can't imagine it ever being good.
It's like a career. Speaking of spoilers, he did the end of Carrie, but for his career. Like that movie, that Dark is a hand punching through the freshly turned soil over a grave.
Yeah.
And I don't think you should be embarrassed. Well, I think you should simply be thrilled at the opportunity that awaits you.
This is going to spur me to watch it. I was, even though that was a joke that I wrote, I was also sort of serious about it because like all of his failed movies are very real, like attempts at something. And especially in that, 10-year, 15-year wilderness period between Dominion and First Reformed, you can interpret the movies as a series of conceptual exercises in how does a filmmaker like me prosper or survive in the current marketplace without losing my soul. And like Dying of the Light is the one where it seemed like, Dog Eat Dog has problems, but Dying of the Light is the one where you watch it and you're like, he's lost his soul. Oh, yeah. But then he comes back with this recut version to reclaim it.
Well, I think watching Dog Eat Dog in the context of I have emerged from Dying of the Light and I have Final Cut now and Nick Cage again and I can do whatever I want. When you see it more as just a guy basically like getting his legs back and running blissfully through a field of flowers. It's not a great film, but I felt, happy for my friend Paul.
Running through a field and sometimes like falling and eating shit, but getting up again and you're still pretty happy for him.
And saying some racial slurs like it's True Romance time and not 2017 or whatever.
Yeah, and I remember there was an article in CinemaScope that Alex Ross Perry wrote. I think he interviewed Paul Schrader around the time of First Reformed. And I remember him saying that it felt like First Reformed felt like the film of a young man, which you wouldn't necessarily, it's not necessarily intuitive because it's done in a sort of like Bergman-esque style, but it is the film of a young man. It feels like, somebody with nothing to lose.
Yes.
And Dog Eat Dog is like that too, frankly. So is The Canyons. And it's impossible to imagine, somebody like Scorsese lowering himself to make The Canyons. And this is why First Reformed helps illuminate The Canyons. Like, The Canyons is this necessary step of like, okay, I've been like chased out of Hollywood. Now I'm going to make this movie. I'm going to make a movie with James Dean and Lindsay Lohan, written by Bret Easton Ellis, where I'm stealing shots at the mall. And that's who I am now.
The second mall they tried to steal shots at, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to go to bat for The Canyons, although yours is one of the voices on The Canyons that I respect that you find more in it than I do. I don't know if I can join you there, but I don't think you're wrong. But
how many times have you watched it? That's my question.
1.5.
Okay,
yeah,
so
two,
I don't.
Two
do
times,
I need to
and that
immerse
felt
myself?
Like too much potentially, but maybe not.
No, the reason I ask is because I've probably seen it 4 times, and the same problems I had on the first viewing are still there, and yet like I keep coming back to it, and that has to count for something.
It's text TV that attracts you, isn't it? Huh?
Text
That's
TV,
pretty special.
yeah. There's something, it's documenting something, and I don't know to what extent it is deliberately documenting that particular moment. When we talked about the film, Ian and I were both in LA when, like, at the period of The Canyons, we were at UCLA.
And both specifically had, like, just become aware of Schrader and were interested in Schrader at that time, I think, as a director.
And to get to basically any other part of LA from UCLA, you have to drive through the Sunset Strip.
Yeah.
Specifically past that restaurant where they seem like they're going to get hit by the UPS truck and then it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So, I think I'm primed to appreciate it, but it's a...
Yeah, then you're confronted with the reality of it. Yeah. But you should get Nolan Funk on your podcast. I bet he'd do it.
All right. I mean, I'll make the ask. I'm not too proud. The guy looks good. I got some questions for him about his gym routine.
Yeah.
I want to shout out Charles, our guest on that episode, who was a similar advocate for the film and was effective in his advocacy in the sense that, like, everything he was saying sounded very appealing to me, and yet I just, like, couldn't find it in the movie.
That's the episode where you turned up the angriest, Ian. You were loaded gun under the pillow that day.
I mean, I was upset by the film. I will admit it, that, even as somebody who had found things in The Walker and found things in all of these films, The Canyons felt like I felt insulted by it. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, it's an aggressive watch. It's sort of it's a provocation, maybe of a different sort than they thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. We can't talk about The Canyons anymore.
No.
We're here to talk about O Canada, which is the latest film from Paul Schrader. It is currently in theaters. I feel so up to the moment. This is directed by and written by Schrader, adapted from the novel Foregone by Russell Banks, his longtime friend, author of Affliction and The Sweet Hereafter, which we mentioned, Banks' final novel. It was published in 2021. He died, I believe, in 2022, while Schrader was writing the script. So he sort of knew that the project was happening.
Kind of had Banks' approval and everything. That's nice.
Surprisingly, he was not sick when he wrote the novel. He got sick afterward, which is sort of startling given the premise of the film.
But Schrader also shared with us that he was sick around the time that he was making this, and sort of similarly was reflecting on the possibility of his own death.
Right, as he called it his first post-mortem film. Mm-hmm. I believe he has long COVID. That's come up in a few interviews, and he was like hospitalized and realized, like, this is he's at the age where one of these could just be the one,
Yep.
And so viewing it from that angle is fascinating. Ian, would you like to give us a quick plot summary?
Yeah, I'd be happy
summary,
to, although
really?
it's one of the more challenging ones, I think. So I'm going to be pretty minimal, and then maybe the three of us can bring in the parts that we think are really worth engaging in.
I don't think that'll come up.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, so the film starts. We have Richard Gere as our lead, returning, of course, from American Gigolo. And he is a old filmmaker, now sick with cancer, seemingly quite close to his own death. He is married to Uma Thurman, and we get Michael Imperioli and Victoria Hill returning as like younger filmmakers who were students of Richard Gere's character, coming to make a documentary about him, to interview him about his life. And we learn fairly quickly that Richard Gere's character, Leonard Fife, was a draft dodger and then also like a leftist filmmaker from Canada for most of his life, and seems to have like at least a very specific popularity with certain people. And Imperioli and Hill's characters are excited to sort of like tell the story. What happened? How did he get up here? And as the film goes on, we're cutting back to the past, and I'm sure we'll get into the formal stuff more. But we have Jacob Elordi as young Richard Gere sometimes, because sometimes we get Richard Gere in his own memories, like playing out a young man, and also sort of go back and forth within a single scene. And the crux of his story is that a young Leonard Fife, he was in a relationship with a woman. He was married, I think, at that point to a woman, like a heiress almost to like a insurance fortune or a pharmacy fortune, whatever.
It's like foot powders.
Yeah. And so he is about to accept this teaching position at Goddard College. But he gets offered the possibility of like inheriting this thing from his wife's dad. And his wife is pregnant, so he's sort of choosing between these routes in his life of, you know, do I stay in Virginia? Do I become this like company man? Or do I pursue my dream of being, you know, like an artist and a professor or whatever? But of course, as old Leonard Fife is telling all this, he keeps like adding in details that are sort of upsetting his wife. Saying things that maybe contradict the like official version of the story or the story that he's told her before. And it's unclear, is he misremembering because of the medicine that he takes? Is he telling the truth for the first time? Mm-hmm. What's happening exactly? But he goes up to check out a house in close to where he's going to be working. And he visits like a friend of his who's already teaching up there. And then we cut back to his youth when he supposedly was going to go down to Cuba to fight with like the Venceremos Brigade or somebody going down to Cuba to like support the revolution, but he didn't actually make it. And we find out that he had a whole nother wife or girlfriend and child, and that a lot of the decisions he made that are supposedly these like great political choices, the way that old Leonard Fife is telling them, they're very self-interested, they're like cowardly, or they're based on attraction to somebody or whatever. And from there, he's sort of bouncing back and forth between present old age, older version of Elordi going up to check out this house, and then like different points of his youth. I won't try to track all the threads, but effectively, we are building up to this decision point where he is going to flee to Canada and begin the like most famous stage of his life and his career, where he becomes this like, you know, sort of revolutionary filmmaker, this rebel, this representative of like new left art, and now like a big artist in Canada who represents this period in time. And we found out that since then, he made a bunch of quasi-left documentaries about Agent Orange experimentation in New Brunswick, Canada, and seal clubbing and like reservation schools and all these different things. But like I said, every time that he starts to tell these parts that sort of like characterize his public image, he adds in details about ignoring his son that he basically ditched for 30 years,
Right.
or leaving a woman behind with no notice, or cheating on his pregnant girlfriend, or whatever the thing may be. And finally, as we're building up to this point, because he keeps focusing on like the day that he went up north, we find out that his wife miscarried. Her mom calls him at his friend's house, and he finds that out. And then he lets his friend's wife jerk him off, basically, in bed, in the midst of grief or fear or whatever the mix of emotions is. And then the next morning he gets up, and instead of going to look at this house, he drives up to the Canadian border and he looks out. And then we get a final flashback to him when he was going to get his like draft evaluation. And he, I don't know, how do we characterize this? He pretended to be.
Well, I'll quote Paul Schrader I think he was quoting Rupert Everett from the set of The Comfort of Strangers.
Yeah.
Elordi shows the pink dress.
He
as
does.
Rupert Everett put it.
He
plays gay.
He plays gay. He wears it like a jock strap and has like fake peace and love tattoos.
Yeah,
he's
done like is it Laugh In with the interstitials with like Goldie Hawn with the bikini. It's like that kind of you know, like cartoon hippie stuff. Yeah,
and so basically he disgusts the like draft officer who tells him like, we don't want guys like you in the army, and he gets declared 4W or whatever, which means that he never had to go to Canada in the first place. So this wasn't escaping the draft. This was him just running away again in that moment from his wife, from this decision that he maybe had to make, and starting a life in Canada for reasons unrelated to the Vietnam War. And that is the end of the film.
And as he dies, we get this kind of cross cut between young Fife saying, "Oh, Canada," as he crosses the border, and elderly Fife saying, "Oh, Canada," as he sort of enters the undiscovered country, as it were.
Yep.
And apparently, Banks wanted to call the novel "Oh, Canada." In the novel, the documentary they end up making is titled "Oh, Canada." He wanted to call the novel "Oh, Canada." I think the publisher wouldn't let him, which is odd because "Foregone" is not like jumping off the page either. As a
right, doesn't indicate exactly what's happening.
Right. So you know,
novel.
it's a film about some interviewers, some younger sort of admiring interviewers, looking like total buffoons, trying to ask a political artist about like the significance of their work, while that artist doesn't care at all and wants to talk about something else. So totally like relaxing to watch as we prepared to interview Schrader, not
about the political quality of his films.
Not just like making me want to jump out a window at all.
Yeah.
But I mean, Will, what did you think of the film? Did you see it at TIFF? I think you mentioned you saw it a while back.
I did see it at TIFF. I like the movie a lot, and maybe this is a bit of a non sequitur, I don't know, but the first thing that I thought of when I watched it was, do you remember when there was a week when Abbas Kiarostami and Michael Cimino died like a day apart from each other? And of course, there were many tributes to the two of them. And I remember Paul Schrader posted something on Facebook along the lines of, why is everyone so upset that two like very celebrated artists, you know, in their late 70s or early 80s died? Like, didn't they have a good run? Isn't it fine? And somebody underneath, you know, somebody commented, well, I'll be sure not to pay tribute to you when you die. And he responded like, don't need to, it's fine. And like, and you got to hand it to him. I mean, I do think he is somebody who sort of lives his politics. I
think so.
He's somebody who's doesn't really seem to care what people think about him or what he says. He's somebody who doesn't cultivate a rarefied air around himself. He's out and about in the city of New York. People meet him, people talk to him. He kind of lays all of his flaws out there. So I thought of that while watching this movie, which is all about like demystifying an artist. He's not somebody like Scorsese And, Scorsese, I think, is a less sociable fellow than Paul Schrader, probably. But somebody like Scorsese, I think, has consciously cultivated a sort of air around himself of like, I'm in my penthouse in the Upper East Side, and every now and then I descend. Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And even now, like the closest he gets to sort of a public persona is having his much younger daughter explain like what Riz means to him, and he reacts in a very charmingly sort of old man way.
Right.
I mean, I don't dislike that stuff.
I like that. He cultivates a sort of like cuddly grandpa persona, which is not the same as the man who was living at Robbie Robertson's house in the 70s, raising hell, sleeping with all of Hollywood.
Right. Or as I think Ian mentioned this on the show, telling Isabella Rossellini that he only married her to get close to her father.
Yep.
Oh my God.
And that's what happens. But Schrader is at the same time, like he feels very open book, but then as we were talking about before we started recording, like if you cross-reference the interviews that he gives, he has a lot of prepared remarks. He has a lot of anecdotes that recur, and so there is I think a sense with Schrader that he is he's a talented storyteller, and he has applied this to his personal life, or at least his personal image. And it's unclear even the extent to which like he's consciously or I don't know, intentionally, like I don't think he's lying, but he is presenting himself very constructedly.
It's a weird thing it's a weird thing about being famous, because like to be famous, you're asked a lot of the same questions over and over again.
Yep.
And so you sort of develop a bit of a shtick by necessity. But then the experience of having, private incidents from your life become a public narrative. For most people, most people's lives like don't matter to other people. And I'm sure it's sort of surreal for somebody like him, like, for guys like us, we're aware of him like being lonely in New York and writing Taxi Driver, and being one of the Paulettes, or hanging out with Don Simpson in the 80s and stuff like that. Like for all of that to become a public narrative, I'm sure is like, it's part of it's part of the job description of being famous to some extent, to turn your life into that, and it must also be weird and alienating. So I'm sure he's wrestling with those feelings a little bit, like exactly that constructed persona you're talking about. Yeah.
What's fascinating about the film, and I read most of Foregone. I liked it quite a bit. And both in the film it's a fairly faithful adaptation, although it obviously has to truncate, and it can't be nearly as like Banks doesn't offset quotations. So there's it's extremely stream of consciousness from like a dying man's brain, and time blurs and all these things. But in both the film and the novel, it's never totally clear to anyone else what Fife is doing. Like he goes into this with a plan. Like he's going to expunge all of this built up guilt.
Yeah, I didn't explain it, but he like demands that Uma Thurman watch this whole thing, because he's saying like, this is the first time that I'm ever going to say the real thing. So you have to be here for it to bear witness.
And specifically, he says this intimacy cannot happen without this microphone and this camera, which of course this excites the podcasters who go through a whole filmography, but it like I think the most fascinating thing about it is that it doesn't really work. Like it doesn't take. They don't seem impressed. Everyone's sort of sad about how this man clearly shouldn't be doing it. Should just be in bed.
Well, I think you get disparate reactions. Right? You get his wife who is saying like, I don't think what he's saying is true. I think he's confused, and it's a little bit unclear. Is she saying that to protect him, or is she saying that because she literally thinks like he doesn't know what actually happened now? He's mixing things up. And then you have the documentary filmmakers who get sort of like, they like salivate at the side of this. They're like, oh, like we're going to get a different type of documentary than we expected. We're going to get like a, behind the curtain reveal. And then like you're saying this to get back to what you were talking about, Will, it's a weird quality where we can imagine this guy who similarly has probably repeated the same anecdotes throughout his life is now telling a different version. And does this mean that there's like finally an emotional charge for him? Does that make it seem more or less true that he's doing this? Is this just like a final performance? It's unclear.
Yeah, it's unresolved in a way that is compelling, but also I think challenging. There are people coming out of this film who aren't loving it, and I think it may have to do with that sort of intentional unresolved quality.
I do think it's an ambiguous movie, not just for the obvious reasons that you're not certain to what extent what he's saying is true, but also because, like, I think it's ambiguous to what extent it matters if what he's saying is true.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a scene towards the end where we see what is in the diegesis of this movie one of his iconic documentary moments, where he's made a documentary about a child molestation scandal in like a Catholic school, and he's filming at a trial, and like he hones in on the alleged perpetrator's face, and somebody says this was such an important shot, this was a shot that changed the world,
right?
And at the end of his life, the Richard Gere character, he can only see his life through the prism of the worst things he's ever done. And, and he can only, like, humans are always self-interested. Nothing is 100% altruistic. And it's like he's giving like the worst faith analysis of everything that he's ever done. And you see that clip from that documentary and you think like, well, even if he did it, I don't believe he only did it selfishly, but if he but if he only did it selfishly, like, does that matter?
Well, this is a question that we asked Paul Schrader, because we had the same thought, not just about this film, but because this is kind of a through line. And Schrader pretty much insisted that he believes that almost the most ungenerous version, the like 100% selfish version, we asked him about things like First Reformed, where we see a character who sort of comes to a big realization. And then obviously there's arguments that in the film, all that's really happening is that he's like despairing and becoming like depressed and self-sabotaging or something, right? It's unrelated to any type of actual interest in climate change. But it seemed like Schrader, whether he was being, just like a little bit of a trickster or not, I don't know. He was saying that, like, to him, it is a question of just like everybody is just doing things for themselves, playing out their own neuroses, their own inherited problems, whatever. And we tried to ask, like you're saying, does it matter if the things that they were doing had an effect? If they did, create some type of like materialist ripple or something.
Right.
Then,
for example, like, does it matter if you're from one of the richest families in Maryland, but you assassinate a healthcare CEO that has hurt much poorer people?
Yeah.
What's fascinating to me, what I was excited about and failed to ask the man, there's two people in this film there's not a very large cast in the movie, and two of them were in the film How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Christine Froseth, and who plays Alicia, the second wife, the patrician like heiress to the foot fortune, and then Jake Weary, who plays Stanley, the artist friend in Vermont. And that's a movie that's very much about, like, everyone has the reason that they have ended up working together to blow up the pipeline, and whether or not they're how valid those reasons are sort of irrelevant because the pipeline gets blown up. And I have to wonder if he saw that film, what he thinks about it. I guess we'll just have to have him back on the show. But it's, I mean, there's first of all, I got to ask you, Will, what did you think of Michael Imperioli's little accent that he was doing? He does I thought it was pretty subtle, but that's me.
I liked Michael Imperioli in this movie, and I don't know how much of that is just that I like him in general.
Sure.
But no, I'm gonna take back that qualification. I like him in the movie. I like his accent. I like him in the flashback scenes where he's got like a wig on or something.
Yeah, I do really like. It feels maybe even like a shot at The Irishman.
I think
his
so.
His pal Marty.
I think so.
Yes.
I love the resourcefulness of it, to just be like, okay, I'm just gonna I don't have $200 million. I'm just going to put these actors in wigs and it will be exactly as convincing. And,
but it also works because he's been doing this thing where like Richard Gere's in his own memories. So, there's sort of like this like timeless quality to the way you look back at yourself. Totally. It worked for me too.
Somebody on Facebook tried to sort of get one over on him and be like, so what's the deal with how come between age 24 and age 70 he gets like a foot and a half shorter? And Schrader said, well, they're playing the same character, so they're never on screen at the same time. It's not a problem.
If you take a shot at the king, you best not miss.
Yeah. Eat shit, fucker. Yeah, that's great.
They are technically in one shot together where like one of them is in the foreground, and then you see the reflection of the other one in the mirror behind them.
That's right. Yeah,
which is a little cheeky. And I think Richard Gere is terrific in the movie. I think he's like really incredible, and I think it's not. It doesn't reflect that well on Jacob Elordi, who I think is more beautiful than he is a thespian, because he doesn't have the. He doesn't have the sauce that Richard Gere has.
The movie, it's so built for Richard Gere. I mean, Richard Gere has like the showier part. He gets to be the dying man in the movie. He gets to be regretful and have the really good monologues. Elordi's fine. I think as a physical presence, he conveys something of. Well, look, he's tall and he's handsome, so
he's very tall and he's very handsome.
So that conveys something of somebody in the prime of life who has a lot of piss and vinegar in him.
Yeah, I also think that because, like you're saying, old Leonard Fife has all this complexity where sometimes they'll just hold a still shot on Gere, and you're trying to figure out like, is he lying on purpose? You're sort of asking all these questions. Whereas it's funny to think of the film as being ambiguous. Because I do think a lot of the Elordi sections are not like telegraphing, but it's very clear. I mean, to just pick the easiest example, he gets to a literal crossroads that says New Hampshire or Canada, and he turns towards Canada. So he's often doing something that is like very demonstrative, I think. And, he gets a call about a miscarriage and he has to show that. So I don't know. And then, like we're saying, we cut back to Gere, who is thinking about those things, maybe imagining that version of himself. There's just so many more layers to that same moment. So I think it's a tiny bit unfair. I think Elordi does fine for me.
He does fine. It's just, it's unfair to. Yeah. I wouldn't take the gig to be playing young Richard Gere. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how much it would pay, but I might give it a shot.
$20 million he got for this movie.
Yeah.
He got the full Ace Ventura when Nature. Wait, is Nature Calls the second one? I think that was the first one where Carrie got.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Of course, an Ontario man like yourself would know about.
Yeah. And I'm still waiting for the third any day now. I hope.
I don't think he's turning it down. Thurman, I think, is a little bit. She feels a little less dialed in. Where sometimes she seems serene, and other times she's very emotional about what's happening. And not having been the wife of a older dying husband, I can't speak to that experience. Maybe that's an extremely realistic portrayal, but I found her to be less convincing.
I was compelled by the character and her plight. I think that when you're around someone, if someone you love is dying, there's there's an invitation to want to idealize them. Like, how can you not? And then you're often confronted with the actual sort of reality of, in my experience of being around people who have been dying, they become more themselves than they've ever been, warts and all. And you've kind of got to deal with that. And then also, she's younger than him and probably idealized him in a lot of ways, and also feels protective of like this crew is here to basically create like, you know, the PBS American Masters documentary about him, you know, like the perfect official story about him. And she's protective of that story because she loves that story as much as she loves him, which is understandable.
Right.
Yeah, I think, you know, I was thinking about, I don't know if you guys have seen that Alain Resnais film, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, which I think was either the very last film he made or one of the last films he made.
You want something? I saw that when it came out and I've completely forgotten it. And I feel terrible about that. But yeah.
I mean, to me, this reminded me a little bit of like various stages of French New Wave stuff where everybody else in the film is acting in kind of a heightened way, not like an extremely heightened way, but even like when he meets his first wife and stuff, there's sort of a quality of like, are we meant to be seeing this like memory version where certain qualities are really dialed up and maybe some of the realistic balancing qualities are turned down? So in Thurman and even in like Imperioli, what I think maybe people could see as one dimensionality or something, to me is like, I don't know, is maybe just a funneled perspective, or they have to respond.
You're wondering
to this.
if even the present is also sort of filtered through Leonard's mind. Okay. Yeah, I mean, in the novel, that's certainly the case. It's just the nature of film makes it a little harder to show how objective or subjective you're trying to be in the present of the story.
Yes. And we haven't pointed out that a decent amount of this is drawn from Banks's own life. So in terms of like self-flagellation or being cruel to your own past or something, the not going to Cuba, the abandoning a first wife with a child. What else?
Well, the divorcing a first wife with a child. I think in Banks's biography, there's he was married 4 times, I think, and had children with a number of the
first 2 wives, I think. Yeah.
The wives, but he didn't. I don't think that he just vanished. I think he sort of concluded the relationship to their faces, but maybe not in a way that was as kind as it could have been.
Exactly. It seemed like he
and also his own father did do the up and disappear thing, and they reconnected later in life. And that father also, I think, a big influence on Affliction.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you know, Banks married a rich Tidewater heiress, and he tried to go to Cuba, and he at one point stole a car and ran across the country with his buddy and all of this stuff.
It's funny. I'm struggling at this moment to think of an artist who doesn't have something in their life who, like, if you were their biographer, you would say, wow, this is a real bastard.
And I think that's like people. I mean, I was thinking about Ian and I have an acquaintance from college who was a real rising star, sort of a bright voice of left theory, who I think kind of pre Me Too, or like it was early,
right in the midst of
in the middle
Weinstein time.
Someone described a pretty shitty evening with this person, and they kind of just dropped off the face of Twitter, and I think a book deal dried up, and I haven't talked to that guy in a long time, and I think about this person was pretty important in my political evolution, and I sometimes wonder well, is this fruit of the poison tree, or that phrase that everyone uses wrong? Is this should I be embarrassed that I really looked up to this guy? I don't think so. I didn't see him do anything bad in front of me, but the film, I was also a big Louis Althusser guy in college, and he obviously sort of
choked his wife. Yeah.
Came out of a fugue state, having strangled his wife to death, and so the film raises these questions.
What the Richard Gere character does in this movie is not dissimilar to what David Lynch did in his life. David Lynch made a decision early on. I can't stay where I am. I have to go make movies. I'm going to abandon my first family. And nobody really holds it against him, because everybody has collectively decided, fairly or unfairly, that it was worth it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's kind of we were talking about John Lennon. That's sort of the John Lennon story as well, a little bit. Like, I have to be too cool for this first wife. I'm getting out of this. You know?
The Richard Gere character in this movie, it's like, so David Lynch, an important part of his origin story is, I'm leaving this family so that I can go to the American Film Institute, so that I can make Eraserhead. Whereas in this movie, the Richard Gere character positions it as, I abandoned my first family and then I just sort of wandered into a filmmaking career that was entirely disingenuous.
Yes.
Was even trying to make a dumber film, basically, than the agent. He was trying to make like I forget how he describes it, like psychedelic colors of crop dusting or something.
He accidentally finds himself filming Agent Orange testing.
Yeah. Right.
Although we've talked about how crop dusting itself is pretty bad. So
and I mean, you talk to Schrader. He apparently has the most bad faith analysis of this character that he's co-created. But I mean, all I could say to that is I'm not entirely convinced. I think good and evil can lurk inside him, and taking this character in the best faith way possible. Like, there are a lot of better ways that you could have had a comfortable life than becoming a documentary filmmaker in Canada.
Right.
Yeah. And like you're saying, Will, my experience of people who are close to death, and also in particular, like older men who are alive in the mid 20th century, you're often very aware of the bad things that they've done. And I think in their final months, they also maybe reflect more on those things. And I'm also, I don't think the film, and at least personally, I'm not saying that we should like ignore those missteps. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, hey, this person did things in their life, obviously an extreme of like an Althusser or something, this person caused harm. And, it's a bit of separate art from the artist and say, what did they contribute in other ways? And that's not saying that like that person in their life can't be upset. To reflect on the O Canada version, the first wife of Leonard Fife, or maybe the first wife of Russell Banks, who I know, quite a bit less about, they have every right to say this person treated me poorly, and just judging them as somebody who is in my life, I can say like, this is not a type of behavior that I think shows kindness and compassion of the type that this person is arguing for. I think that's why it's more interesting when we talk about these like leftist figures or leftist artists, because at least in theory, they are saying, let's create a society built on a human empathy. Let's create a society based on recognizing needs, recognizing suffering. And I don't think it's like a gotcha trap to say, oh, you want Medicare for all, but here you are being kind of a piece of shit or something, but it is.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's perfectly valid to say, like, let's look at those things, and then, let's not throw out necessarily all the other pieces of a David Lynch filmography or something. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think we demand such like moral unimpeachability from anyone who's trying to argue, anyone who's trying to tell you how to live at all, rather than, I think the more nuanced, the better, like, considered position is that who better to think of ways to like protect people from our worse impulses than someone who has bad impulses. I mean, obviously there's a limit to that. I wouldn't put
Woody Allen
in charge of
yes.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
right, exactly.
And there's the money in their pocket question, which is like, do we continue to fund this person?
Yes, but and that's the whole other question of like the CBC money. I love that they're specifically calling out CBC in the film.
I think Americans who watch this movie find this funny in particular. I think to Americans it's intrinsically funny that Canada has a thing called the CBC and that we have our own like filmmaking television infrastructure. Like, I think Americans look at that and say, that's cute.
It is cute. I mean, it's like on The Simpsons when Santa's little helper like put on a hat and I said, look, he thinks he's people.
Well, we did for Sweet Hereafter. We tried to reflect on, and I guess I'm curious what you think, Will, state sponsored art, which in theory we have in the US through like the NEA and stuff, but not in a super meaningful way.
The like Transformers films are state sponsored.
Sure, yeah, DOD funding. Yes, that's Iron Man 2.
Here in Canada, the CBC has long been viewed by conservative politicians as just like, I don't know. They've been trying to defund it for years and years and years, trying to privatize it, and they probably will soon. I think I think much great Canadian culture has come out of. Well, actually, I don't know how broad a brush I want to paint this with. I think I would actually rather think about Europe, where much fantastic, great movies have been funded and other art as well by proud European socialism. And
a lot of British film.
Of course. Oh, I remember going to see Zama, the Lucretia Martel film Zama, in a theater, and the sheer unending stream of like state film funds got a laugh from the audience because it just went on and on. That is, like this is Film Southern Argentina sponsored this movie, and also Film Northern and Film Western Argentina and Brazil and Portugal. And they all get their little logo on the screen.
There are successful Kickstarter campaigns with fewer donors than just the number of bodies listed in these opening credits.
But it's I think much more dignified that Lucretia Martel doesn't have to put like, Cinema Dude 99 as an executive producer of the film. And instead it's just like some guy who owns a bank. I mean, from my perspective, I think the National Film Board of Canada is aspirational. It's beautiful. There's a website where you can just go watch stuff for free. A number of documentaries that you've covered on Michael and Us, I've seen through the NFB site and really appreciated the Gilles Gruel film.
Oh, you watched that 24 hours or more. Yeah.
It's great. And also a film I talk about all the time, Kanasatake.
Oh yeah,
a number that I forget. Years of Resistance, the Alanis Abamsawin film.
I love that film. I'm gonna tell Luke that you watched 24 Hours or More. He'll get a kick out of that.
Please do. Yeah. I was eating. You could tell him I enjoyed a Pizza Hut pizza while I watched 24 Hours or More. I mean, and we actually it came in handy when we talked about the unproduced Schrader script Québécois. Which is like a gangster film set during the crisis in Quebec at the time, which is kind of a cool script. But is there an analog to Leonard Fife that you're aware of in Canada, or is this sort of just an imagined figure, like a type of guy?
That's an interesting question. I would say it's more of a type. Although I guess actually Alanis Abamsawin is probably the closest analog I could come up with, just in the sense of she is, if I'm just off the top of my head trying to think of who's a very famous like Canadian documentary filmmaker who was worked entirely within the borders of the country, whose name you would know.
She's been kind of canonized, right? Yeah. Like I assume she has some kind of Medal of Merit or something.
Whatever we give out, she has it. Yeah.
Which is kind of the Leonard Fife thing, right? They're saying like, this will really cement your reputation. You're already beloved, but now you're going to be official.
It's interesting because the film presents us a little bit. It's more clearly expressed in the book that she is as much a part of the Leonard Fife career as he is. That Emma, his wife, is she's his producing partner, and like she is doing all of the movies the same way that I think Christopher Nolan's wife is like as much of Nolan as he is. People talk about Nabokov's wife as well. There are these
Hitchcock.
These couples.
Hitchcock,
of course. And so there's a sense in the book, and maybe hints of it here, that like part of the preservation of his image is like a career concern for her, and also maybe a pride concern for her. And like in the novel, he dies on camera. Yeah. And like in the chair, not in the film. There's that real nasty scene where the camera assistant goes and puts like a secret cube camera on the armoire to like catch his last moments. But in the book, there's sort of a epilogue section about getting the releases signed and how long it took for her to eventually. She agreed to allow the film to air and show his last moments or whatever. in order to with her input as to like how the story concludes. And so there is also this idea the film is playing with about like, I guess who owns the idea of someone, who owns the idea, who gets to determine what this figure means, this historical actor means. And I posted about this on Twitter. We were talking about it the other day, Ian, but Leonard Peltier is in solitary confinement right now, and someone mentioned on Twitter, like, Leonard can't talk on the phone and really appreciates letters. And like, I am aware of Leonard Peltier, and I had not really thought about him as a guy who like needs something to do today, even though I know he's a political prisoner in jail. And like having the idea that I could, I don't know, in some small way, like alleviate the boredom of a historical figure is not something that ever occurred to me. And so like the way that Imperioli is interacting with Gere, even though they know each other, he's trying to get like the stories. He's trying to get the hits. Like, tell us about when you met, there's a whole thing with Joan Baez in the book. Like, tell us about when you met Joan Baez. Tell us about, like, did you have to like steal the footage from the lab? Like, were they trying to stop you from making this movie? And this guy's just like, man, I can't get over the time I was shitty to someone in high school. And, you know, who I don't know which of those is more important, you know, like to the historical record. And I think that's an interesting thing that the film is getting at.
It's an interesting question because, like, I haven't read the book, but, you know, obviously the character is more haunted by the experience of being mean to somebody in high school, and it probably, you know, shaped their life and influenced their life more than meeting Joan Baez did. You know, so yeah, it is an interesting question.
Yeah, and I think part of that is also recognizing that for those people, the person that he was mean to in high school, probably that is the thing that dominates their understanding of that person, right? It's not like for them, they went on to say like, oh, these documentaries are terrific. They probably kept thinking like, oh, he was just kind of like a shitty little guy that I knew one time. And I think this is a consideration in lots of Schrader films. And we also kind of tried to ask him about it, but I think he had just wanted to talk about a different thing a little bit. But we were asking him, you know, like, to what degree do you think it's possible to reflect on like how you appear to somebody else in a medium that is always kind of like filtered through either like an objective lens or a specific interiority, right? How do you capture that like back and forth of what does Leonard Fyfe mean to his wife versus what did he mean to himself versus what did he mean to the world around him, right? You know, there's in a novel, maybe you can delineate those things a little bit better. But right. I think in a film, it's hard to recognize when you're moving from one to the other sometimes. And
Schrader does play with aspect ratios and sort of
he does, yeah.
Color temperature and all these things. And he was in the interview he gave to a friend of the show, Bilge Ebiri. He was talking about how I think with a little bit of frustration, talking about how basically you can do Mishima on a laptop, like all the stuff that was so hard for them to do on celluloid in 85, like now it's very easy. But I enjoyed how they kind of broke up the different periods with the subtle changes in like the look of the film, and also the unacknowledged dual roles of just a few of them where you're like, oh, do these people mean the same thing to him? Or is this demonstrating how he's misremembering or how the worlds are blurring together where, you know, his friend's wife who jerked him off looks like Uma Thurman.
Right. Yeah. You just can't remember well enough. Yeah. I mean, I like that like tiny touch. Again, sometimes the film is sort of like indulgent and recognizing its own choices, but that's the type of thing that I think you're right. Doesn't really get like, you know, is she French Canadian? The intern who works for them is also his first wife. And,
right.
You know, is this, like you're saying, is this just because an aged Leonard Fyfe probably can't remember his first wife's face that well? Yeah, so he's just remembering
face
her.
Is getting, yeah. And that actress is Australian, which,
very funny.
So that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Schrader really loves Australians lately. I don't know why.
I'm sure Schrader is engaging in a bit of self-flagellation with this movie. You know, I'm sure goes without saying he's been much honored, and he who's probably highly aware of his flaws and limitations and all the people that he's wronged. And, you know, I was about to be very dogmatic and say, well, if he was mean to someone in real life, if like, for example, there's a very powerful scene in this movie where Richard Gere's estranged son approaches him at a festival or an award show where they're honoring him, you know, a show where they've gone out of their way to talk about what an important and relevant and socially conscious artist this man has been. And the Richard Gere character just heartlessly says, never talk to me again, and goes away.
Yeah. In kind of like a childish fact, like he doesn't want to even deal with it.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't have a son.
And like, if you told me that Paul Schrader did the exact same thing in his life, I think I would say that's terrible. But then, you know, also like it doesn't change Taxi Driver. It doesn't change Blue Collar. It feels irrelevant to that. Although recently there was a scandal involving Alice Munro. I don't know if you heard about this.
Oh, yes.
Yes. With her partner. Yeah. And the fact that she stayed loyal to him.
That's right. She had a second husband, I think, who had molested her daughter, and she basically stayed with him and said, "Don't bring this up again, please. I'm happy in this marriage." Yeah. And I must say that has affected how I view Alice Munro. And this movie, Oh Canada, it's raising the question of like, how can somebody who apparently shows such social conscience in his work can behave that heartlessly in life? And, you know, I've thought that a lot about Alice Munro in recent months, you know, somebody who's such an incisive and empathetic and, you know, any word you want to conjure in her writing. Right. And it does affect how I view her writing. It does make it seem, I don't know, make me disconnect from it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure where the line is, except that it's just one that we impose ourselves based on our own morality.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me wonder if there's a difference in a fiction, an artist who works in fiction versus one who works in nonfiction. I mean, obviously we're talking about Paul Schrader, who's not a documentarian, so that might answer the question somewhat. But I wonder if, like, because Alice Munro, you know, she's a novelist, so it's her work deals with, like, very intimately with sort of imagined interpersonal connections. And so I wonder if it colors that more than finding out that this guy was a schmuck would color the facts that he revealed about Agent Orange in New Brunswick.
And I guess also the fact that, like, Alice Munro, Paul Schrader makes movies about tortured people and people who are irreconcilable with themselves. He makes a movie like Autofocus, which really literalizes some of these issues, where he's one way in public and in parts of his private life, and then a completely different way in another part of his private life. Whereas Alice Munro, you know, in her work comes across as like so wise and so all-knowing. You know,
that's what I was going to say, and not just wise about life in general, but specifically about. I mean, I've read Alice Munro's short stories about abuse or about like the loss of a child. So there's not like this huge bridge to cross, and like you're saying, Jake, to sort of keep the subject separate. And it's not disingenuous exactly, but I totally get it, Will. And I also agree that sometimes there's a little bit of a like big brain superiority of saying like, well, I don't let that affect the way that I view this artist at all. And in fact, if you do, then you're like a plebe or something. But I think it is fair to say, well, the way that I was inspired to think about human suffering and the complexities and how it manifests in behavior, now I am adding an ingredient, which is knowing that you, the person who were discussing these things, were also compartmentalizing or were also making decisions. And I agree that for me, maybe somebody like Schrader, it's a little bit easier to say, hey, this guy who from the beginning has also always portrayed himself as extremely messy and not particularly like on top of his personal life, not on top of his like artistic decision making. Well, not on top, but like conflicted in his artistic decision making, often saying that, you know, he wants to make a movie like this, but maybe it didn't even succeed. So there's not a lot of a sense of like elevation or being beyond reproach or something. So I don't feel as bad when I find out that he did something a little bit stupid.
That he was like cruel to his brother, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Whose name is Leonard. So I wonder what, like, if that, does that feel strange? You know, to make a movie about your deceased estranged, a man with the same name as your deceased estranged brother. Mm-hmm. He also, one of his most recent sort of hit Facebook posts. Sometimes they break containment. They end up on Twitter. Yeah. He posted, and Nick Newman scooped this one. He was the first to post it. For 18 years, my brother's ashes sat in a garage in Los Angeles, then his wife's. I finally got around to giving them a proper internment in Chappaqua, I don't know, near the Quaker Church. While I was at it, I decided to buy a 4-banger, and then there's a photo of this big, like, black marble tombstone that says Schrader, and it has Leonard Charles, Chieko Saito. He spelled his deceased brother's deceased wife's name wrong, or the tombstone maker did. So I hope he gets his money back. And then a space for himself and for his wife.
Well, I have a new Graceland, folks.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I gotta go. But, like, you know, that in itself is like an odd. On the one hand, it feels touching, but at the same time, like, you know, would your brother at his death have said, like, no, you've been kind of a shithead. I would rather not be buried with you. Like, you making this decision for the legacy of someone else. I don't know. It feels of a piece with sort of the questions that this movie is asking. And I think one of the most powerful things about the film is that it doesn't seem to matter to anyone except Leonard. Like, this is a guilt that is his own and is unresolved through anyone else's perspective.
Yeah, or maybe not that it doesn't matter, but even the things that they're going to take away from the story he's trying to tell are not the things he even wants them to take away. Like, they're going to use it in a different form, so it didn't amount to what he was trying to achieve, regardless of whether they believe him or not. I may decide to cut this out, but I do want to read just a tiny little portion of Paul Schrader's, one of his letters to his brother Leonard from his days at UCLA. This is from
which we should say he published these. He sent them to Film Comment to publish. So yes, this isn't like stolen.
Right. This is not like private correspondence. It was private correspondence that he made public, but I think it's illustrative. So this is January 20th, 1969. A bit of the way into the letter, he says, "Well, Peggy's been gone for 3 days now, and after 3 days without girls, I can get back to the main thing. Masturbation. I mean, with chicks, that's one thing, but this is something else. It's all right here in the thumb and forefingers, and you've got it. You can think of anything, trees, brother. boats, planes, big tall buildings. And when you get back to chicks, man, it's just not the same thing." And then I'm going to jump ahead a little bit.
There's a monologue exactly like this in, what is it? Is it Your Friends and Neighbors, the Neil LaBute movie?
Yeah.
about masturbating to platonic forms?
Whatever you want.
It's like, nobody can make me come like me. I think is how the monologue ends. Sure. Yeah.
And then he leads almost immediately into 2 UCLA students were shot and killed on campus Friday. Fuck. Ron Karenga's US group wrangled with the Panthers in a public meeting, 150 present, and 2 Panthers ended up dead. It was about 200 yards away from where I was in the movie department. Somebody came in and said that one student had been killed and the gunmen were still on the loose. By the time I marshaled up the courage to venture over that way, the police had arrived and sealed the building off. I did see the bodies. The Panthers turned in the names of the killers, but they haven't been located yet. There were 2 job offers in the MP bulletin board for film MAs. One at U of British Columbia, and another at a California college. Basic pay was $8,900 annum, and in both cases you teach 2 courses and become an assistant professor. So I guess there's some demand for my skills. So I just think it's a fascinating choice of montage of things to move from one thing to the next thing.
I mean, I think it's really fascinating that this film is in theaters at the same time as A Complete Unknown, the Hallmark looking Bob Dylan biopic where everyone is much better looking than they were in a way that's very disappointing. Will, have you seen the Bob Dylan movie yet?
No, I have not. I'm a little...
Do you plan to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably find my way to it, but no, I'm not that excited for it.
Yeah,
it's probably it's the best era of Bob Dylan's career, and it's the era I'm least excited to see in a movie because it'll just be all the received wisdom you've already heard.
Exactly. It's just like I think that those letters from Schrader and this film are really like speak to the uncrossable gulf between like historical actors and people viewing them from the present, where like he didn't get up and say today is the day that of the famous killing in Campbell Hall, and like you're not walking around with Buffalo Springfield playing in your ears
right. Yeah.
wondering what's happening, and I think that's important to remember, and also like demystifying obviously, but the one of the things I appreciated about this movie is how nailed I felt by Imperioli's character. Like, yep, that's how I probably would act.
And I also want to point out that I didn't want to make it sound like either Schrader or Fife in the film or Banks are like too solipsistic or something, because you get Will, you brought up that wonderful moment where his estranged son goes to confront him, and there was a shot that I really loved of the son leaving the theater, knowing that he's going to talk to his father, and he's sort of like mouthing. It's, like a more subtle version of the thing you get in rom-coms or something, where people are practicing the lines they want to say to the person that they have a crush on or something. But, and he like wipes away a little bit of sweat, and there's just a tracking shot of him across this lobby that is not at all like, there's nothing focused on Leonard in that moment. Like this is right. Giving us a real moment with this guy, with this moment in his life, which I think shows that there is a world beyond these guys, and Schrader and Banks are aware of this world, which I think is great.
What's interesting is that I think maybe because it's one of the few images in the film of Richard Gere not looking upsettingly ill and poorly lit, there's a shot from like this moment that has been one of the pieces of key art for the film in the marketing. Like, I think one of the first images released from this movie was in that red lobby of Gere looking at someone concernedly, and we don't know, months ago that this is the son. But like, so I was waiting for this moment to come up in the film, and to have it be this cruel and also like anticlimactic, because he doesn't do "I have no son." He's like, I don't know, I'm leaving. It's painful. This is one of the most Canadian looking men I've ever seen, this actor. Something about him, I don't know I guess I know where they found him actually, but he seems, I don't know, particularly not from Richmond, Virginia to me. I hope that's okay to say.
That's funny. I'm not a great judge of being able to say what Canadians look and sound like, just having been immersed in it. Every now and then,
also not being a race realist, as far as I know. Yeah,
well, I know that Canadian skulls are shaped a certain way, where it's like there's an indent on the part that like stresses deference. So
yes, of course. What did we think about the music? He's kind of gone back to the light sleeper well of picking a pop artist or a sort of a singer to score the film with song, with Phosphorescent. I was surprised to learn today, reading the interview that Bilge did, that Schrader initially approached Bruce Springsteen about scoring the film, and then realized that Springsteen singing the Canadian national anthem is just going to have a particular character that will distract from the film.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm just glad to hear that Springsteen's still picking up the phone for Schrader.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. After the Light of Day debacle, but I mean, I like Phosphorescent. I find the guy's voice affecting and haunting.
I don't have a fully worked out thought about this, except that I think it's interesting that there are a number of different visual styles in the movie, but the soundscape remains relatively the same. And I think it's good that way. And I can't explain why I think it's good that way. it's good that there's the sound helps create a sort of consistent mood across all of these spaces. That's all I would say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it to me contributes to the confusion between like, when is he ironizing himself? When is he trying to? Because there's also a couple like positive moments that he highlights, far fewer of them, but things that he seems to like look back on as just emotional things in his life. And then you get the present where we're not even quite sure what's happening. So to have a consistent sound, I think does, I don't know, creates this uncertainty, contributes to it. So
yeah, he's not like exactly aping the music of the time in which much of the film is set, which I think is helpful, where you don't have like, you know, some now twerp, like, you know, if you got like Jake Bugg to do music for a film about a Bob Dylan type character, that would be, I think, feel more like cosplay than, but this feels like it's linking the two time periods. I kind of like there's just a line in in O Canada in the national anthem that I want to shout out, where it says true patriot love in all of us command. And I feel like that's more honest than many national anthems are about just the sort of the force applied to all of the subjects.
Well, it's a good thing you have a real live Canadian on the show, because I have a little bit of factual tidbittery about that.
Would love this.
Until recently, the lyrics were "in all thy sons' command." But then the woke brigade came along.
And woke Canada.
Yeah, and now it's "in all of our command." I grew up singing every day at school "in all thy sons' command."
Wow.
Yeah.
So all the girls got off the hook. They have it so easy.
Hey, they can take some of the load, please. It's too much command for me.
I mean, it's kind of it's weird to hear another nation's national anthem. I wonder if you feel
really,
this way about...
brings things into sharp relief, huh?
I mean, what I'll say about the American national anthem is it's very action packed. It's got a lot of bombs going off, you know, that sort of thing. Rockets, red glaring. All that.
Yeah.
I got some tidbittery about the U.S. national anthem for you guys, if you'd like. So apparently, this is as many songs are from, especially back then of days. It borrowed the melody from an existing song, but in this case, it was I guess a popular like 4-part song, and so the different parts of the melody that were carried by different singers and different registers were combined together, which is why the national anthem is so incredibly difficult to sing.
Interesting.
Excuse me, the American national anthem.
Yes.
I'm glad you said that, because my next observation was going to be how hard it is to sing. So I'm glad you gave some context.
It's crazy. They basically took like, you know, it's only Mariah Carey style, like 5-octave singers should be able to really handle it. But I guess that's why this nation is so exceptional, because even our national anthem is harder.
Yeah. Yep.
Dog shit country. Will, while we have you, I do want to ask. There's another of our beloved filmmakers who we covered on the show recently, had a film come out. I wonder how you're feeling about Juror number 2, if you have any spare thoughts about the great film. Well, I gave it away.
Have you seen it?
We've all seen it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've seen it. We lapped it up.
Okay. Yeah. I loved it. It was great. I was lucky enough to see it at a movie theater. I saw it on, I was in one of the rare cities that got it in a theater.
So lucky. Yep.
I had the ideal experience with it, where, you know, half the theater was, you know, me, my friends, you know, all sorts of, like, you know, there were young, like, programmers, young filmmakers, people intimately connected with film, and the other half was just old people who go to that theater every day.
Oh yeah,
and would be going to see Conclave, if not that. So
this is a real treat for them.
Oh, yeah, the vibe was great.
But that's what we were saying, is that it would have just like swept these people up if it had been available to them anywhere.
And all of us were united with this movie. Like, you could feel the energy in the room. It was so entertaining. And the old man still got it.
Absolutely. Talk about a movie that feels like a young man's film. You don't see any age in that film at all. Except maybe some of the...
Well, yeah, certain of the... Do you remember there's a scene that begins out of focus and then like...
Yes, on the stairs, on the steps outside the courthouse. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nicholas Hoult comes in from like the right of the frame. That's awesome. And that's one of those one of those Clint moments.
Just a little 15-17 kiss sprinkled onto the otherwise fairly straightforward film.
Yeah,
exactly. The real heads.
I did want to ask. I didn't want to turn you into a Canadian correspondent here, Will, because I respect you as a complex
that's Jesse
individual.
Hawkins' job. That's what we bring Jesse Hawkins in for. So,
but I did want to ask, because there is this awareness of Canada as this place that you can flee to escape.
Oh, of course,
political malfeasance in the United States, like draft dodging, or obviously is the focus, but
or the threats when Trump won, that sort of thing.
Right, exactly, and obviously sometimes also held up. I think any listeners of your podcast would know, mostly incorrectly, as this like land of quasi socialism. But do you guys learn about Vietnam draft evaders going to Canada? Like, is this a part of your history, or is this a thing that U.S. people care about because that's one of our primary relationships with Canada?
It's definitely something we know about, but is it taught in the curriculum? No. Are there Canadian Heritage Moment TV ads about it? No.
Yes.
But because American culture so dominates, American cliches about Canada also dominate. So yes, we have heard that.
Okay.
Is it irritating to think of, because you're, especially on your show, I learned so much about all of the ways that Canada, let's say, could be improved. And so to hear people say, "Oh, Canada is this place where all the problems have been solved," is that great on you?
Well, we've made a conscious effort to talk a little bit more about Canada because we don't just want to be like the Canadians who only talk about America. Even though America, let's face it, it rules the world. But yeah,
we make Seinfeld, we send it up there, we keep you hooked,
yeah, exactly. I think what irritates me most actually is when Americans, after somebody they don't like is elected, they say, "Oh, I'm moving to Canada," or if Trump gets reelected, I'm moving to Canada, as if you can just like stroll in here,
right?
That annoys me.
There's no anti-immigrant rhetoric in Canada right now.
Right.
Oh yeah, no anti-immigrant rhetoric at all. Like we're not incredibly influenced by everything that's happening in America at all times. Mm-hmm. We're not about to enter, at any minute, 10 years of conservative rule that's gonna chip away at everything we have. Yeah,
it's kind of cool the way that it's sort of like you can think about someone across the world looking up at the same moon. We're all looking ahead at the same fascism creeping, no matter where you live. It's sort of beautiful in that way.
God, I'm weeping.
Of course.
I have a couple other minor questions. First of all, I just want to point out, we've talked about the arcs of SDSers and these people who maybe get involved with left causes. We did discover in researching this episode that 2 mayors of Los Angeles were in this Venceremos brigade of people who were supposedly going to go. Some of them went to Canada to cut sugar cane and stuff, and are now the current mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass.
Yeah, Karen Bass, who to remind folks, she went to Canada. She went to Cuba to help out the rebels down there. They in an interview, Banks referred to being swept up in kind of a Robin Hood moment, that like you didn't even need to be that far left to see what Castro was doing is kind of heroic and exciting. And then this is the self-same Karen Bass who recently was on stage with, I don't think it was Nick Fuentes, but like a known Nazi guy was just standing behind her as she delivered some announcement about money being allocated to security for these events that take place in like the Pico Robertson area of Los Angeles, where real estate deals. There's auctions, like pre-sale auctions for land in Gaza. That's
like in the process of being stolen land.
Yeah, it's being cleared as we speak. So you might as well. You should get in, and then they need, of course, security from like people outside chanting "You're doing something bad," and having a sign. So
same Karen Bass going to get her picture taken at like recently cleared homeless encampments all the time.
Yeah.
Well, in the city of Toronto, where I live, council just passed a resolution banning protest near places of worship. And why of
just
course,
a neutral.
Interesting.
Yeah. You know, why, of course, would that be? Well, because they're auctioning off stolen land at synagogues now. You know, using the synagogues as shields, basically.
Right. Which is
interesting.
Just nasty.
Interesting to think about. When I approach her with my camera to ask about the street vendors, I will also bring this up when I make I've become confused, and I think that someone really has offered me money to do this. I was going to mention the reason that Joan Baez comes up in the novel is that she was one of many Americans opposed to the Vietnam War who were also critical of draft dodgers going to Canada because they thought it was sort of ineffective or counter to the cause because, you know, the people thinking the right thing are just leaving the country, or it made more of a statement to get yourself thrown in jail or to go underground. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's interesting the way that the film positions his flight to Canada as this heroic or this, like, you know, admirable act, when even at the time, as the book points out, this was seen by some as like
the lesser
selfish in its own way. Yeah.
I think that's right.
You were going to say something?
Okay, yeah. My final question. I don't know how much time, Will, you've spent in Montreal. Do you ever go over there to the other regions of Canada?
Yeah. From time to time. I like Montreal a lot.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to shout out. I'm not sure if you clocked this. It would be almost impossible. The actress playing the Leonard Fife's nurse, I think her name is Caroline
Daverna, yes, from Hollywoodland.
Oh, yeah.
The film where
the Ben
it's sort of an autofocus adjacent film, I would say.
Yeah.
So I guess she's part of a acting family. I don't know if you're familiar with her mother, but I became an immediate fan of both of their work, not on screen, but on the public transit systems, because I guess both her mother and her mother is famously the voice of the Montreal, like, subway, whatever it is called up there. I don't know.
She's the train.
She's the train. She's Mrs. Train. She's Ringo herself also. And
then my God.
The daughter just recently became the voice of the Rousseau Express Metropolitan. So there's like a beautiful, I mean, talking about people who are
that's incredible,
making material changes in real life. Be the voice of the train you want to see in the world, you know?
You know, that's really exciting to hear. I'm not on the subway in Montreal enough to really register it. I mean, if you told me that it was the subway voice in Toronto, you know, a couple years ago, Toronto actually hired Seth Rogen, who is Canadian, to do like transit announcements, and he did them with shtick. He was like, if you see somebody, report somebody, you know, like that kind of thing. Man. And it was the most unsettling thing, because you'd be standing there and then all of a sudden you'd hear this like very distressed sounding like male voice blaring, and you'd think like, are we under attack? It's it's Seth Rogen.
Seth Rogen saying like, don't smoke on the train, even though I totally would, buddy.
Exactly.
You know which train he would really be smoking on?
The pineapple train.
The freaking pineapple train.
Oh yeah.
Hell yeah. Interestingly, the nurse character, and I don't think this is it optically, it looks kind of bad, but thinking about how, you know, the realities of truncating the story, I don't blame him. In the novel, the nurse is Haitian, and Banks spent a lot of time in the Caribbean and wrote about Caribbean experiences.
A novel about Jamaica.
He's any like cursory description of Banks will include that he was one of the most sort of race interested in race, like sensitive white writers of his generation.
Mm-hmm.
And in the movie, she's just a white Quebecois.
Yeah.
And even reviews of the book, some of the reviews that I read suggested that this character was a little bit underdeveloped. She is mostly just like a voice from outside of this world who's saying like, why are you doing this to an old man? He needs
like
to
unadulterated
rest.
compassion or something.
A person without, or just like kind of, without the film blinders that we all have. She's like, well, this is stupid. What are you doing? And the novel actually ends on her leaving the, I don't want to read it because I don't want to give it away, but sort of leaving the building and wondering whether she's going to tell her husband about her patient who died today and deciding not to. And it's an interesting counterpoint to all this concern about how to tell the story of this man's death.
Yeah.
And she just decides, it's too complicated to get into, and we're going to dinner, so nice. I don't want to spoil.
I like it.
Yeah. But nope, just the lady from Hannibal. I mean, she's good on Hannibal, to be clear.
Nah, she is. Yeah.
So we've been doing something on the show where we are tracking a certain tendency in Schrader films, because in February of this year, he said this about one of the films he is working on.
I've never written a script about sexual obsession, and so that's the one I'm doing now.
And so over the course of the filmography,
could you what did he say? He's never written a script about
sexual obsession.
Oh. Yeah. Hasn't he?
And so this is obviously the question. So we've been going through and just tracking how wrong that statement was, because we thought, what a silly guy who has this odd perspective on his career. And then we asked him about it, and he basically interrupted me to say, I just misspoke. That's wrong. I don't know why I said that. So anyway, we've been doing the sexual obsession check-in to determine whether these films could be called about sexual obsession. And I don't know what I would say about this film, because so much of it...
it's in there. It's in the mix.
It's a man who's very clearly, like, his life and certainly his idea of himself is so determined by relationships with women.
Yeah.
I don't know that he's sexually obsessed in the present of the story, but I'm curious what you think.
I think he is about as sexually obsessed as any of us is. Maybe a little bit more.
Me. Yeah.
Not you? Yeah. You keep it all contained, right?
Yeah, I keep it pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, how could you podcast this much, right? If you're letting out that energy through such trifling ways as sex with a woman.
Exactly. Women ruin legs, as Mickey says in Rocky.
Raging Bull, yeah.
Oh man, I'll drink to that.
He's literally drinking for the listener. I mean, I don't know. It's I can't think of another film where a character looks through a window to watch himself having sex. Which is just a compelling image, to say nothing of Elordi's finely shaped buttocks.
Yeah.
But
no, beautiful.
Of course.
I think really what he's doing there is just literalizing something that many people have done, which is remember good times that they've had in the past during a dry stretch.
Yes, euphoric recall, they call it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Ian has a technique he calls the dry stretch, which I have counseled him against doing too much. I don't think it's good for the skin.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
You're sort of my
I'm very
sexual conciliary. Yeah, that's great.
I'm the, what's his name? Tom Hagen? Is that the...
Yeah, that's right.
The
James Cum, yeah.
Not to be... Yes. Yep. So, okay, the film is sort of about sexual obsession.
Yeah.
So glad that we've got this on the record. I mean, just an incredible... having the opportunity to ask a question that's been eating you up inside of someone and have them tell you, I don't know, I think I was confused.
Yeah, I meant something else. Yeah.
Shit. All right.
I mean, isn't that what this movie is about?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Oh, Canada, indeed. Our home and native land. Well, Will Sloan, thank you so much for returning as the final boss of the show to help us round this out.
My pleasure. And is your next director going to be, another one of my guys?
I hope so. It's Steven Soderbergh. Are you a Soderbergh man?
So I like Soderbergh. I wouldn't call him one of my guys, but
okay, interesting.
But who doesn't like him?
Yeah,
well, there's another challenge that we face if we're trying to book Will Sloan for the last film in a filmography, the guy's gonna put like 6 more out by the time we get to the end of his fucking run. Like he's working faster than we can podcast. So we'll have to we'll figure something out.
Yeah, the film hasn't even been conceived of yet that we would talk about with you.
A lot of people saying he should do the Luigi Mangione story. But I like to think that the story is far from over. So maybe he'll be doing Behind the Candelabra too, further behind the candelabra. Anyway, Will, is there anything that you would like to plug? Anything folks should check out in the Will Sloan verse? Of course, obviously your wonderful podcasts, but anything particular you got cooking up?
Honestly, that's about it for now. But podcasts, but keep an eye out. There may be things in the future.
Yeah, stay frosty. Will Sloan may be coming up behind you at any moment. And do check out 24 Hours or More, the wonderful documentary film, and then listen to the Michael and Us episode about it. And don't forget to visit Pizza Hut restaurants. They pair wonderfully with
now more than ever
films about the October crisis. That is about going to do it for our episode on O Canada. Remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. Helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad. Sort of ramble about it to a documentary film crew. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcasty For Me. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or you're interested in co-hosting a 2-person Steven Soderbergh podcast, you can email us at podcastyforme@gmail.com. All of that is at podcastyforme.com. Thank you, as always, to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. And for Mr. Ian Ryan, bye.
Bye.